Welcome to Digital Currents, brought to you by Morgan Creek Digital. I'm Xavier Segura. Each episode, we spotlight the topics and people changing the tech industry with a focus on AI, blockchain, chips, and big data. Thanks for listening, and please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
Mark, happy Friday. I think we're kind of somewhat back on schedule.
We are. Look at this. We're back on schedule and we're back to matching. I mean,
Here we go.
yeah, we got the whole palette of blue from dark to super light, but I like that we, and we don't coordinate this. So it is kind of amazing that great minds think alike. All right, on the wardrobe, the quick reveal. So I got the Bitcoin orange pants on today, and I have the rocket ship Bitcoin sock game. So, I guess that's partly in homage to Rocket Man in DC, tearing up things with USAID, et cetera, at Doge. But mostly, we've had this fits and starts. People didn't get exactly what they wanted from the big announcements with the executive orders. I just don't think people really paid attention to the difference between an executive order and an act of Congress. I mean,
Right, and
they're very different things. And, one requires time. The other is a stroke of a pen and a ceremony. But you can't have executive order be super wide reaching because of balance of power. I mean, we don't want a single person being able to, well, I woke up and I really want to do this, so let's just do it. So
that'd be a different government, very different government. Yeah, but I think, as we've had a lot of kind of interesting developments this year, Mark, despite it only being 6 weeks into the year. I feel like we've been a little bit more like, 3 months into the year, which I think could be a good thing, because I think it shows that people are really, they've come back to work. Everybody's super focused. Our trip schedules have ramped up. We've done the Middle East. You're getting ready for Asia. And I think what I'm seeing, Mark, globally, is that there is this reception towards VC, number one. There's a reception towards, okay, what is happening in the blockchain space? And there's less of a question of AI, because AI has now just become your public strategy, right, for your growth, which is great.
It's a great point. We had micro strategy, drop the micro and become strategy with the little Bitcoin symbol. And I saw somebody said that it's probably going to happen, that was the interim step, and then they'll change to strategy bank with the B being the Bitcoin symbol. I think that's because it's basically what it is, a Bitcoin bank. And the little company that I got involved in, Metaplanet, as they, created the Asia version of Strategy now, Strategy B. But I think your point is also really well taken in terms of people are ready to go. I mean, we had so much innovation kind of out there in 2024 in terms of LLMs and development in LLMs, and everybody topping the next one. And we had the massive rise in chips and the announcement of Blackwells and all this stuff. So I think people are realizing, wow, it is time. And to your point on get to work,
Right.
I think 4 of the Mag 7 have reported earnings, and I think each one of them, the smallest announcement of expected CapEx, so capital expenditures, this year was 50 billion. And I think the highest was 125 billion. Now, whether they'll actually spend that much, and I think those numbers were created, actually I don't think I know, those numbers were created before the release of DeepSeek R3 or V3R1, which I really do think fundamentally changed the game in terms of, yes, I think that Jevons paradox says as the price goes down, demand goes up and there'll be more use cases. I mean, Microsoft published a blog this week about 300 real use cases. Now it's just blatant advertising for their Copilot thing, but it doesn't matter. I mean, they went through company by company, and these are big companies doing really interesting things, saving hours a week or, multiplying the impact of a single person in their effectiveness. And I think that's certainly real. And so the use of chips broadly is only going to go up. But the efficiency through software, and that's what DeepSeek really showed us, is, well, if I can't get all the chips because of this silly trade, limits, I'll just rewire them better and I'll write software to access them better. And I loved one of the things they did with the random sampling, as opposed to saying I have to recreate the whole database every single time. Like, well, if I only need a piece of it, I can just let the other stuff stay in low bandwidth memory for a while and just plummet the cost. So enhances in the algorithm and you and I did with a webinar yesterday on it'll be on our Around the World website or YouTube channel. But we did one on DeepSeek and a global war in AI. And war, I don't mean like shooting guns, but there is an escalation in who has the best AI technology, and what does it mean what if China actually does have better tech and we're actually playing catch up? Mm-hmm. And the fact that they put the AI system DeepSeek in open source, I think it's really kind of funny. So you have it called Open AI, right? Capital A, capital I, Open AI, but it's closed source and closed system, and you have to pay for it, and you have to pay extra if you want extra features. And then the DeepSeek guy said, no, open source, meaning now we want everybody in the world to use our models and our algorithms and embed them into the infrastructure. That's truly open AI, right?
No doubt. And I think you hit on really the whole point of this chat today, Mark, I think is going to be about AI and how that affects spending, because later on, we'll kind of go through some of the capital expenditures for some of the big tech companies or the AI hyperscalers. But probably the first story talking about Amazon, and this is in direct response to DeepSeek, right? So there was this fear, and why did NVIDIA go down? Well, there was some, I guess, two reasons really, coming down to breaking up the hegemony of the H100 and sort of the kind of more advanced chips for AI. But then also this idea that, and this is kind of where the analysts are not technologists, the belief that you will somehow need less of these chips or advanced chips in general, less compute. So that is categorically false. Amazon is the first bow across the bow. They have doubled down on AI, no surprise to you, Mark, with a $100 billion investment surge. And they're projecting this is what they're going to be their capital expenditure for 2025, 35% increase year on year, and far shattering the analysts' expectations. So, I think while some of these AI chip stocks like NVIDIA are temporarily down, this is really showing that, the price of a stock is kind of a snapshot in the moment of time of what future earnings may portend. So if some people are thinking, well, maybe these chips aren't going to be as good anymore, the landscape is going to change, it might cause them to do something else in the markets. But, here Amazon is saying that, their strategy is remaining unchanged. They are a data company. They are an e-commerce company that uses data. They're going to need more of these chips. And since they are not a startup anymore, Mark, there is only one way they need to do this, and it is through brute force, to kind of segue your sentiment here.
Yeah, look, I agree with that, mm-hmm. with one little addition.
Of course.
Which is, look, I think Amazon's a great example of AI in the sense that it's one of the really good applications and use cases of AI, right? We've all done it. You go to buy something and, you need to get another like $17.43 to get free shipping, right? If you're not Prime. And so then the AI makes recommendations to you based on a whole bunch of factors.
It generously makes the recommendation, I might add. It's very, very generously, looking out for your best interest, right, Mark?
Exactly. I can save you some money on shipping. And I know you'd like this because you happen to be a 61-year-old male with, 2.5 children. And yeah. And they do all, and they're actually really good at it. I say Pandora and Amazon to me, and Spotify probably too, but I don't use Spotify. But those recommendations are really good. And they're based on other people like you, based on data. And this is the point I'm going to make. So the one augment to your point is what I think DeepSeek really, really shows. All the things that you said so far, but what it really, really shows to me is why the D, right? We talk about the ABCDs. And we don't talk as much about D because people are like, oh, big data. Of course, big data. It's great. No. Data and the metadata that describe the data are, I think now, been shown to be the absolute most important thing in all of the other stuff, right? I mean, blockchains organize, capture, store, or, and allow us to compartmentalize the data. So without data, blockchains really don't have much use. Then you got the chips and the computing platforms. They process the data. They analyze the data. They do all the stuff with the data. And then the AIs make decisions with data. But here's the thing. Part of the reason DeepSeek was so much better, and now Qwen, which is Alibaba's, is even better. I mean, I run all three. You're right. I asked a question to ChatGPT, then I asked it to DeepSeek, and then I asked it to Qwen. And routinely, Qwen is actually better in many different ways, less hallucinations, faster, more complete. And it's not that ChatGPT is bad per se. It does still hallucinate more than the others, and it tends to be a little bit slower, and it tends to have more bias, actually, which is interesting. It has more bias than DeepSeek, which everyone said, DeepSeek's going to bias because it's Chinese. That's the difference. China's data is better. They have more of it. They have less restrictions on it. So they were able to train on just better data. And Alibaba, I think, did some advances that I don't really understand that allowed them to, again, they have massive data because of their e-commerce business. And that's why Amazon has such big advantage. We all use it all the time. And they have really like real data. Like if you actually buy a product, that's I think, way more interesting information than what you click a like on social media or what you browse on. I say all the time, how does anyone know me? Because when I go into a browser, sometimes I'm browsing for me. Sometimes I'm browsing for my 14-year-old. Sometimes I'm browsing for my 6-year-old granddaughter. Sometimes I'm browsing for my parents. And so,
yeah, what you touched on, Mark, is really a big problem. It reminds me of like back in my tech days, what you're describing is called attribution. So if I'm a marketer or if I'm a big data company, I might have a household where there are multiple people doing different actions. And so if I'm trying to pinpoint, what's happening, that's quite difficult. There are some easy ways, and then there are some creepy ways that this gets done. So first, we'll start with the easy one, right? So if I am, let's say, in my Google browser, right? I am logged in. So presumably, I am the one using the rest of my my internet session at that point in time. A cookie will be dropped if I open up an email, and I can kind of track my session. That one's pretty easy. The more creepy one is if I am logged on my email on my phone and I have my phone next to my computer, and now I'm kind of in a multi-session type of environment where my information on my phone and the kind of GPS are letting me know that I am here right now. So my computer can kind of rectify that in the back end. But to your point about intent, that's a really powerful point. And this is where marketers argue all the time on what classifies as an action. Is it just seeing something? Is it clicking something? Is it buying something? And so if I'm a government, as we've traveled around the world, I have made the case, as have you, that data is the new oil. Data is the most valuable thing that a government has because it knows what's going on with their population in a given time, and it can make real decisions that impact real people. And so this is sort of the controversy, and probably, Mark, one of the highlights, I think, of the chat yesterday, which folks should definitely check out. We'll have that available to you, is that this idea on data privacy and some data concerns, where if you have sort of one entity, in this case, the U.S., as a tech kind of community versus another tech community, the Chinese tech community, well, how are those two going to interact, right? And it was funny because we had sort of policymakers opine that, we should shut this down, which is the normal reaction from policymakers. And then Apple saying, no, this is a great money-making opportunity for us, or to advance technology, not money-making, to advance
technology. As there's free and open access. It's all Google paid. So you get paid.
We are just a steward, a gateway for technology development. So, they made that open. And I think, Mark, they've continued to make it open, although we are seeing some markets respond to this, mainly the government employees of places like Australia, Taiwan. Some talks about maybe the U.S. having a little bit of a clamp on this. But, when you're talking about the information that's already available, the tech companies already know our age. They already know roughly how much we spend, roughly how much we make, where we live. And then, if you kind of pair that with, what the state knows, then you really start thinking about predictability. And then that's where, a marketer can benefit, but then also, technology makers can benefit from this. And I think there is this fork in the road between the predictive capabilities of one nation versus another. And that's kind of where you start seeing this need, or this insistence on how we can cut off this degree of information flowing or getting collected from another sovereign, potentially sponsored entity. Because I find it crazy that, let's say if the model costs around $6 million, which I don't think that it does, it probably costs more than that, the DeepSeek model. Any one of the big boys, Google or OpenAI, is at least 100 billion. 200 million to kind of get things going, right? And so when you're looking at, what are these companies going to be doing in the future, that spend is going to continue. And we're seeing this also, Mark, transition into other places like France and the UAE have created a $50 billion bet on the future. So they've met at the Artificial Intelligence Action Summit in Paris. And they have a deal to kind of spend and build 30 to 50 billion in AI, creating data centers and a campus that is kind of sort of aligned with a couple of different things. I didn't, in my head, Mark, think about kind of France and the UAE as having a solid data partnership. We're seeing many different weird things happen. But, Mark, they're also aligning things, agendas on energy policy, because as we know, France has around 30 or 40% of their energy coming from nuclear. In the GCC, they're thinking about ways to switch to other power uses or power sources for their use. And when we're thinking about, these advanced AI models, they're very power hungry in their current state. So
that to me is one of the really fascinating areas of debate and discussion. We had a question from somebody on the webinar yesterday about this. Is, what about all the huge demand for energy, and then after DeepSeek, all the energy companies, all the nuclear stocks, all the utilities, they all got pummeled.
Right.
It's like, well, yeah, because it turns out if your only method of doing something is brute force, like in the old days of getting access to the internet, right? There were internet ISPs, internet service providers, which was literally that weird guy down the street from you growing up who bought a bunch of computers and put them in his garage. And then unbeknownst to you, when you logged on, you were going into his garage and he was charging you before things like AOL were created. They were the ISPs. It's kind of like, little small cable companies that became the big Liberty Media. But that's the way it was. And so the idea is, well, if I have one PC, if I buy a second PC and a third PC and a fourth PC, I could do more. Well, then someone said, well, what if I wire them differently and I make them parallel process instead of serial process, and I get more. I don't need as many computers. So now I'm using less electricity. And then what if I connect software that, virtualizes access so I can do it in this other remote area and I don't have to go right to the ISP itself, and that reduced power consumption. And so, when the internet came out, it was like, by, I don't remember what it was. So that was like 1996, 97. They're like, by 2000, the world will be cooked and the oceans will be, and Florida will be underwater and all this stuff's going to happen because we're going to use all the electricity in the history of the world. But we didn't. You can't extrapolate the first, kind of hot wired system. It's kind of like cars, right? I mean, the original cars, they got a few miles to a gallon, and then they got better and better, and the engines got more efficient. Or I'm sure you've seen the picture of the rocket engine, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the rocket engine with all these things, and then the second one's got fewer, and then the latest one looks pretty sleek, and it actually got up into space before it blew up. So, and now they're saying that's what Elon's doing to the government. He's taking all those pipes and wires and consolidating, which will be a good thing. Some of those pipes and wires are really bad, but ultimately, innovation in all forms, whether it's the actual chip innovation or whether it's the packaging of the chips or whether it's the utilization of the chips in an environment. And just take a simple thing like Bitcoin mining. So if you put a bunch of Bitcoin miners in a room and you turn them on, they get hot. Why is that? Well, because you're processing so much information back and forth. And remember, you got the memory over here and the processor over here, and it's got to go through these little wires, and that causes heat through friction, and so you get heat. So someone said, well, what if I took those things and put them in Iceland? So Iceland became a hotbed of Bitcoin mining because turns out you don't need to cool. You just open the windows and it's really cold. And so if you think about where it was better to do Bitcoin mining, it was in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere or near the equator. And so Saudi Arabia has a huge advantage. They have all this free energy, essentially, flare gas that, plentiful, but it's really hot there. So to build a data center, you got to spend a ton of money cooling. So people say, well, hey, I got an idea. Let's immersion cool all this stuff. We'll put it in oil and that'll help. Well, what if somebody said, well, I got a way to move as one of our portfolio companies, I'll move the memory into the processor and then there won't be as much heat. So now I can actually do it in the desert in Saudi Arabia. I'll take a bunch of those chips. And then someone said, well, that's great, but electrons are going to create heat no matter what. So what if we try photons? And so there's going to be this cascade of innovation, and it certainly helps to have money. So places like UAE and Saudi Arabia that have a lot of money can make investments in this beautiful future. And will it all be perfect? Like the first data center they build, is that going to be ultimately the best thing? No, it'll be really good, and it'll be a step toward that next iteration. And to your point, if they used nuclear power, it'd be a lot cleaner than burning the gas. But my thing on the last point on this, and then I'll let you go, is flared gas, super bad for the world. Now, we all need the oil. Look around, everywhere in your room. If you're listening to this, look around and think about what your life would be like without fossil fuels, without oil. And it's a whole nother debate whether they're actually fossil fuels or not, but that regardless, oil. So, okay, we need the oil. And to get the oil, there's this associated gas, and they don't have pipelines, so they just flare it. They burn it off. Burning natural gas is not good in terms of particulates and stuff like that. So what if we stuff a turbine on it, and then we produce electricity, and then we attach a computer, and now we got stuff, Bitcoin, that we can send anywhere in the world. That's pretty cool. So that innovation, I might argue, is even better than nuclear. So taking all the flared gas and getting it online in Saudi might be better than doing a deal with France, but geopolitics are important. So,
I mean, it'll be interesting too, because if I look at data policy in France, which is extremely restrictive relative to some place like the UAE, which is trying to be very open in terms of how it's, advancing its policy. This is one of those things where you're going to see the maps redrawn when you're thinking about data alliances, because as we've said, sort of the big, treasure trove will be the countries with the most data, because then you can do the most stuff. But I think what you're going to start to see is, a country like France, way bigger than the UAE. So it is a place that is sitting on a large pool of assets. They were part of this European alliance on an AI regulatory commission, which we saw earlier this year, in kind of a multi-country effort to sort of curtail some of the rapid advancements of AI. But I think we're seeing those, whether those are in Europe or whether those in the States, these attempts at regulating AI are still relatively slow, and they are relatively cumbersome in terms of how the technology will play out. So when I see these kinds of policies, which they're different countries, different continents working together on this multi-tech effort, I think it's pretty encouraging as we start to see, the technology is not going to be siloed. In order to unlock that technology, it really needs to expand, cross-border, and that's nothing new. So I think
I think it's a really, really important point in that collaboration is superior than separation.
Mm-hmm.
Just is. And so, there's this backlash now against globalization. We got tariffs and trade wars, and so, but at the end of the day, good technology, no matter where it comes from, whether it comes from France, whether it comes from Switzerland, whether it comes from China, whether it comes from the United States, whether it comes from Ghana. I mean, I don't really care. We should want the exchange of those ideas. And that's why this move to open source is so important, because it lets everybody collaborate. And the thing that's interesting about the digital age, right, which is what our ABCD is all about, is this entrance into the digital age. The digital age is far less about lines on a map,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's about the ether. It's about this world, this metaverse, and Snow Crash on my desk over there. Amazing book, and described the metaverse in 1991, and so we're all going to goggle up and live. maybe not, probably not, but I am going to spend a lot of time this weekend playing Monster Hunter Wilds beta, which doesn't actually come out till February 28th, but I am going to play the beta this weekend. And it is becoming so realistic. It's not completely immersive yet, but it's amazing. And look, we've all seen the AI generated video today, like in the last week, made by, DeepSeek or a few, Quen, versus just 6 months ago. Like 6 months ago, you'd catch that the person had 6 fingers or, their torso was split the wrong way or whatever. And it was kind of choppy. I mean, there was one of Albert Einstein teaching a class.
Wow.
That was awesome. And you think about, I say this all the time, like we know who the best teacher of whatever subject. I always use, freshman chemistry. Why does anyone in the world take freshman chemistry from anyone but that person? And we can either have that person create live video, or now we can study their entire body of work and create an AI version of that freshman chemistry lecture with all of the enhancements up to the minute, right? So it'll never be stale, in the voice and the mannerism of this amazing teacher. And then I was talking to this one little company, and they have secured rights to artists' stuff, like all the stuff, like one of their clients is John Bon Jovi. So they have all of John's stuff, from like recordings from high school to his clothing to everything. Like, I think it was like 144,000 different things. Now think about this. John can't sing right now because something happened. But what if you could train an AI not on the world's data, but on that data? Like, back to how important data is, on the actual footage and mannerism of John Bon Jovi, and then create new art that he or his family would own, and maybe they share it with the company, but that's actually kind of interesting. I think that's a very fascinating use case. Now, we need some way to label it as not real, meaning not original.
Right.
I guess it would be real in the sense that it was based off them, but I do worry a little bit about when it becomes completely indistinguishable from real life. How do we know? So we're going to need blockchains, I think, to make that happen.
No, it's an important idea on kind of the proof of person, which is one of the types of authentications or reward systems in blockchain as a way to designate, is this a real person, watching or just being seen in an environment. So two things quickly that you mentioned, Mark, that I wanted to include is this idea on AI power consumption. Recent report by Goldman Sachs. I was pretty shocked to hear this. And so, these are projections. They're not gospel, but within 2 years, power consumption to the grid for data centers will increase 50% and as much as 165% by the end of the decade, which is, last time I checked, 5 years. So that is a, question we got in the webinar, which was a great question, thinking about energy. But of course, these are just projections because we are not accounting for more efficient uses of power by these models like we saw within DeepSeek. And another thing that you mentioned, Mark, is this idea of our friends, Michael Saylor over at the rebranded strategy, right? So underneath that, we also saw our friends at BlackRock. They have increased their stake and de facto increasing their bet within Bitcoin as a whole. So they put in a 5% stake, which is pretty big. Right now, you have to declare it on your tax form. Do you hold more than X% in a publicly traded company? And so this is following already a very aggressive move by Saylor, accumulating over 471,000 BTC, or call it 48 billion with a B. And despite a pretty heavy Q4 loss, it was 670 million. They're still performing well, but they're still executing on this plan, right? Where they're going to make 42 billion additional Bitcoin purchases. So I'm kind of looking at it as a couple of different ways. So let me put my maxi hat on, Mark, if you'll humor me with this. So if BlackRock is now increasing their share of Michael Saylor's company, yet Michael Saylor is increasing their purchase of BTC, by extension, BlackRock is increasing their share of Bitcoin consolidation. And further, the U.S. government as a huge backer of activities in BlackRock. Mark, we haven't really spent enough time talking about a fresh Bitcoin conspiracy. I sense one beginning to brew with this idea for Bitcoin hegemony, but at the same time, this is what also happens when you're getting at a different point of the S-curve. I think for BlackRock, this is a solid investment, but it's also about access to BTC. There's just not that many. There's a finite supply.
Yeah, look, I get a couple things that are important. So one, BlackRock is running an index.
Yeah.
Right. So, they have to buy whatever gets bigger in the index. So if NVIDIA goes up, they have to keep buying it no matter how ridiculous the price gets, right? Just like Cisco in 2000, just like Microsoft in 2000. You can't argue, right? You're an index and you have to buy. So part of that is just as the market cap goes up, as the price of Bitcoin goes up, as they keep accumulating by issuing new bonds, you just have to buy more. In some ways, it's like I said, that little company, the Asian version of Strategy, Metaplanet, they're like all excited that Norge pension fund took a position, biggest pension sovereign wealth fund in the world. It's not a pension fund, sovereign fund, Norge. And since, it's like, well, no, they have to. They have to own every security in the world because they have so much money. And so it wasn't an active decision, them saying, oh, attaboy, that's great. It's like, now, it is cool that they own it because, they wouldn't have owned it a year ago. But the point here is that's the first point. The second point is this conspiracy, and Max and Stacy, started it, and a bunch of people talked about it since day one when they were talking about the ETFs, that, oh my God, here's what's going to happen. BlackRock's going to come in and they're going to buy up all the Bitcoin, and then they're going to steal them. The government's just going to seize them. Okay, fine. But let's just play this out for a second. Unless they get 100%, not 99.9, not 98, not 96, unless they get 100% of the Bitcoins, it doesn't matter, right? Whatever they were to confiscate. And the problem with the confiscation is, Elizabeth Warren, let's say she passed a bill that said, we, for the betterment of national security, we're going to seize this drug dealer money. And Larry just handed him over. Okay, but here's the problem. Again, unless it's 100%, there'll still be some left. And just like all the coins that have been lost or stolen, just like the Satoshi wallet, it's never been moved, all the value then accretes to what's left. So as long as there's one Satoshi, not even a full Bitcoin, 1/100 million, all the value of the network would go into what's left. So I hear the boo birds and the people who are worried about this, but at the end of the day, owning the asset, no matter how concentrated that ownership is, doesn't change the value of the network and how many units you ascribe that total value to. Now, what could happen, right, is let's say they keep accumulating, and then not seizing it wouldn't be the problem. The problem would be selling. Because here's and this is the lunacy of all assets, equity assets, and currency-like assets in the world today. This concept of market cap is just silly, right? What they do is they take the last price for a little tiny amount, like 100 shares of a stock or $50 of currency, and they say that price times the total number. Like they did this with Trump coin. They said, well, based on a price of $54, the gazillion billion Trump coins that the original owner, whether that was the Donald himself or somebody else, owned, they're worth $50 billion. Right? No, they're not. Because if that wallet that kept the first 80% sells one, you get a Hawk Tuah event, right? She just showed up after her 2-month hiatus. She was crying, saying she was sorry. I'm like, stop, okay? It's not rocket science to say if you keep a bunch here, and then you sell it, everyone else will run to the exit and it will plummet. So the nightmare scenario is not that anyone seizes the Bitcoin. It's that a large owner, BlackRock and or Strategy, were to sell. So like the ultimate rug, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but the ultimate rug would be Saylor accumulates all this Bitcoin, drives the price up. Then he not only starts selling, but he goes short Bitcoin the other side and then starts selling out of Strategy and makes a gazillion. Like that's what they said about DeepSeek. They said, oh, this hedge fund must have been short NVIDIA when they released the version 3. Maybe. I mean, certainly would have been a good idea, because that's not even like what all the short sellers do. They publish like lies and fiction, and stocks go down. I mean, lots of people have been accused of that all over the internet. This was actually a real thing, right? You know, if you control this thing that would make, you know, people question the value. So that's a long, winding way about saying it's not a confiscation that would be a problem. It would be a selling of this big, because what would happen is the price would gap down a lot faster than people think.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's one of those where it can be a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of how you look at this. I think just undeniably the short term is what it means is that Bitcoin is below 100 grand. There's expectation that it could run this year. And I think, you know, as is human nature, we cannot think human beings are at their nature, at their core, terrible multitaskers, right? Sometimes are very difficult doing one thing at a time. So if AI is in vogue, now kind of Bitcoin is kind of back in the shadows at its measly 97K. But
to that point, the fair value of BTC is around 95K. And what are you talking about? Well, if you take a Metcalfe's law model and you take the number of users and the hash rate and all the fundamentals, because Bitcoin actually has fundamentals, right? It is a network. It is the most powerful computing network in the history of the world. It's got thousands and thousands of nodes. I mean, we can actually calculate, and Tim Peterson has done this over and over again. So the fair value is like 95K. So right now we're right around fair value. Now, if you do a power law model based on gold prices. Now, why would you do it based on gold prices? Well, because gold prices are an indication of the devaluation of whatever currency you're valuing it in. So whether you do it in euro or yen or dollars. So let's do it in dollars. So what has been happening is the money supply has been creeping back up, right, since they cut interest rates. And when you increase the money supply, the value of hard assets, whether it's real estate or whether it's Bitcoin or whether it's gold, suddenly goes up because you've got more dollars competing for the same value. And so the things that are stores of value go up in price. So as gold has surged, right, it's up 45% in the last few months and, you know, near record highs again this month. If you look at that relationship to Bitcoin, that says the price could go as high as a couple 100,000. Now, whether it jumps over to 200, that I don't know. But here's the thing. That fair value is just going to keep accreting. It's going to go from 95 to 98 to 99 to 100. If we get too far above fair value, we'll have another correction, and how bad that correction is, I don't really know. It depends how much leverage there is. Like we saw this a couple weekends ago, right? Is prices were well over 106,000, and suddenly everything crashed because of this release of DeepSeek, and everybody was worried. And they're like, well, why are those correlated? They're not, except they are in that if you owned a bunch of NVIDIA levered, and you got a margin call over the weekend, you had to liquidate. Well, what'd you liquidate? Well, you liquidate what you can, bonds or cash or Bitcoin. Oh, but then there was a real problem. There were a whole bunch of people who bought meme coins and other coins, altcoins, on leverage. And they got margin called. And the worst part of it is they weren't like watching the ship and they didn't have any reserve that they could, get the margin call satisfied. So they got liquidated. Like literally over $2 billion of coins got liquidated. Leverage is a tool, y'all. Mm-hmm. It's not a panacea. And it cuts both ways. And I've told this story before, and I shouldn't throw my brother under the bus, but I will. He calls me up one day years ago. It was like in the 2020 crash. And he says, they stole my Bitcoin. What are you talking about? Well, I was on BitMEX. I'm like, stop. Nope. That's not stealing. You opened up an 80 vol asset. Not a good idea. But I'm not passing judgment, but not a good idea. I am passing judgment. It's a bad idea. And you got a margin call and you didn't meet it. And they took it. Now, it is true, with benefit of hindsight, that these particular companies prey on people promising big returns if you use their leveraged products, which should be illegal, but they get away with it because they're offshore. And their whole goal is to liquidate and steal the Bitcoin. So they kind of did steal it, but it's still on him or anyone. If you use leverage on a too volatile asset, I don't care what it is, stocks, bonds, currencies, cryptocurrencies, it's your fault. It's not their fault.
And hard to draw causality, Mark, on the price of BTC. All we can do is try to lay out a timeline and try to make some inference in terms of how market events kind of impact what we saw. But, over the weekend, this is last weekend, we dropped from about 105K all the way down to 91,
right,
as our administration prepared to levy an import tariff, which, not only reverberated in private markets and public markets, but you're seeing this occur within BTC. And of course, orders sort of paused, Bitcoin recovers.
Well, that was what I was talking about. It wasn't the deep peak, it was the tariffs. It was the
tariffs. Exactly right. Yeah, thank you. So then, as we're seeing this now, then, what our friends over at VanEck, as they custody their ETF with our other friends at Gemini, and kind of linking this back to what we saw with the guys over at BlackRock is, holding BTC could be well suited to weather macroeconomic volatility. Imagine that, Mark. An 80 vol asset could be best used to weather macroeconomic volatility. I think we've seen it all. But
100%. Embrace volatility, right? All volatility is disagreement over the future of anything. Whether that's a stock, whether it's a bond. I said treasuries have no volatility because everybody knows the future. They're not going to default. Stock, Amazon, lots of volatility. Bitcoin, lots of volatility because there are still people that believe Bitcoin's going to zero. Actually, there are people that believe that. And there are people that believe it's going to infinity. So when that gap is really wide, the volatility is really high. But if you embrace volatility and you build a portfolio of highly volatile assets that are uncorrelated with one another, you win. Harry Markowitz, he got the Nobel Prize for one of the great discoveries of all time, that if you add volatile assets to a portfolio, volatility of the portfolio goes down as long as they're uncorrelated. It's absolute brilliant.
Yeah, that was one of my summer reads. As you know, I'm a fan of all things Tony Robbins without getting too cultish. I think there's some good lessons. He interviews Dalio and this idea of investing in alternatives and investing in 8 to 10 uncorrelated high vol assets is kind of the strategy, which was nothing new. To your point, it was leveraged earlier on, but kind of had been the key to Bridgeport's success on the years. But as we kind of discussed earlier on, we're thinking about on the AI stories and their investment in just their overall capex and how that's gotten a little bit crazy. Mark, I'm not sure if you know how crazy it is until we turn to our chart of the week. I will share my screen and let me know when that is visible to you. And for those that are on audio only, as we remind you every week, tune into YouTube, see the Bitcoin stock reveal, see if we're matching this week. We are. And of course, the chart of the week.
Love it. Love it.
What we're seeing here, Mark, I'll describe on audio and then get your thoughts as always, is 4 companies, the AI hyperscalers, Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Amazon, over a 4-year period through the end of last year, and looking how they are performing as far as their capital expenditures quarter to quarter. And what we're seeing here is that it is not the same number or even the same rate. There's certain peaks here, but it is increasing. Mark, when you see this chart, what comes to mind? Obviously, we've started covering about this, but there has been an explosion here.
Well, it's an absolute explosion, and it's an embracing of this construct about AI, right? So, it's funny. 75 years later, after the coining of the term, suddenly people are like waking up, oh, yeah, this is a thing. And it is a realization that these new NVIDIA chips do allow you to upgrade your old CPU-based data centers to GPUs. And so it's a little bit of an upgrade cycle. And it's a little bit of, hey, the more you announce that you're doing, the more value you get for your company. So there's a little bit of virtue signaling here saying, oh, well, we're the biggest, most favored customer of NVIDIA. I think these numbers will get revised downward in terms of the ones that are forward looking. I'm going to take the under on how much people actually spend, because I think, the DeepSeek news really changes the game. But I'm not surprised by it, and I do think we're at a very interesting juncture here as to whether these big 4 can maintain their dominance. Is this a 2001 moment when, at the time they said Cisco was the only company you really needed to own to build the internet, right? The internet was this novel new thing. It was only 5 years old, and people didn't really understand, and they thought Cisco was going to provide all the tools. It turned out they weren't the only provider, and there were these things like broadband that actually became more important, and fiber optics, and so it wasn't just about Cisco routers and connectors. So I think what you're going to see, in my view, is a little 4 or a little 5 or whatever the number is of new entrants that are going to come in and start to take share away, because they're going to do things more efficiently, more effectively, or embrace new technology. Look, it doesn't mean that these are bad companies, and it doesn't mean them putting more resources behind the experiences that we all love. I use essentially these services every day. I don't really use Facebook, so I'm not a Meta user. But I don't really use Google anymore, because I use the ChatGPT like stuff, or DeepSeek. I certainly use Microsoft, although I'm not using their AI, so they can spend all the money on AI they want, but I'm not using it. And Amazon shows up on my front porch every day, so that one's real. But I think there will be more innovation in the next layer down, and I think you'll see this peak and drop, my expectation. But that's actually one more.
Because if you just kind of look at this trend over time, these categories, their ratios, what's not really shown here, you have to kind of infer, their ratios have also been consistent over time, meaning that they're roughly spending, these 4 companies are roughly spending around the same. Their denominator is growing, but by percentage, they're all roughly in line with one another. And so now we have the announcement from Amazon expected to be $100 billion this year, 35% the 2024 growth. So what do we expect is going to happen to Meta? What do we expect is going to happen to Alphabet, et cetera? If history is any barometer of or foreteller of the future, we'd expect they're increasing their expenditures as well in the AI space. But to your point, this kind of gives a opportunity to the next crop because it's not always the biggest spender and scalers in tech that are the most dominant. It's the ones that are the most innovative. And if they're kind of just rinsing and repeating and kind of basically utilizing a strategy that was employed by, 16th century mercantile exporters of, economies of scale, I'm just going to get as much stuff as possible, bring down my cost. That doesn't really work when you're trying to think about how a software can optimize a hardware and give me better AI performance. So
yeah, and there's a couple other things on this 2X, and that this doesn't adjust for money devaluation. And a dollar doesn't buy as much today as it did 4 years ago. It buys about 25% less. So if you adjusted these numbers for inflation, they would look a little bit different. But then there's the inverse of that, which is they also don't adjust for hedonics, meaning that the chips that they're buying actually do more, and therefore, maybe these numbers should even be more skewed in the sense that if you're spending more money, the money's not worth as much, but you're spending more money on chips that do way more, maybe it's even more exponential. But then the question is, well, how many of those chips is the user actually going to use? I say this all the time about like hedonic pricing adjustments for like washing machines. Like a washing machine, they judge how white the clothes get. Like, it doesn't really affect me. Or they judge, processor speed in a computer. I don't type any faster. No matter how fast my processor processes, I don't type any faster. And yes, I can maybe do more work behind the scenes if I program something to run multiple iterations if I have a faster processor. But there are certain things that, like, I don't read faster. My visual reading speed isn't going to go any faster. So I think there's a lot of complexities in this. And at the end of the day, the thing that's the most interesting for me is most of this spending is U.S. company to U.S. company, and that's good for the U.S. economy. But what about the fact that now Huawei, as part of this DeepSeek thing, has announced that their chips, which quote unquote weren't as good as the NVIDIA chips, are actually getting about 90% of the effectiveness at about 5% of the cost. How many of these companies are going to say, give me some of those? Now, if you listen to the tech CEOs like the Anthropic guy, no, that's not allowed. We need to stop all trade with China, and we can't let. Like, really? Regulatory capture? But I don't know. It's just, there's so much to talk about here, and it's, tech's going to continue to I mean, we're using it right now, and we use it every week, and you sure said, but I don't want 1080 pixel camera. I like my 720p. It keeps me kind of fuzzy, but
it's something for the imagination. I think one thing, Mark, we could close on, which we didn't even discuss, is Super Bowl 59, the most televised event in the United States, with the estimates, and these are just estimates because there's a huge gray market, 1.4 billion in betting towards this event. And of course, the Super Bowl ads, which we can't get enough of, they're watched as much. And Mark, this is the new one, which I wasn't aware of, but now that I had young children, the Puppy Bowl is also a thing. So look out for that for those that do watch the Puppy Bowl. It's on before the big game. In the rematch of Super Bowl 57, Mark, who do you got? Give the people some picks for the Super Bowl.
I struggle because I don't really have a dog in this fight. I mean, I don't. And look, I hate. It's a strong word, but I hate Kansas City. Not for the reason everyone thinks I hate Kansas City. I grew up in Seattle. I hate all of the original AFC West teams. Seattle. So Kansas City, Oakland, Denver. I hate them, and that's deep seated from being a child growing up with Seahawk colors. And So could never root for them. And I don't care if they're America's team now and they're Taylor Swift, whatever. I don't care. I'm probably in that group that thinks there was a little bit of scripting this year. It seems like
A little favorability. Yeah.
favorable calls. But all that aside, I saw somebody say this is great. They said their prediction was they're going to rig the game so that Philadelphia wins to prove that they don't rig the game.
Oh, that is some 3D chess, or that is some go.
It's like serious 3D chess. So basically he said it's going to look like a wipeout for the first 3 quarters, and then Philadelphia's going to stage this amazing comeback. They're going to win in overtime or something, and they're going to prove that they don't rig the games and keep the three-peat as this lofty goal to keep everybody watching. So, one of my good friends is a Philly guy, so I guess I'll cheer for Philly.
Yeah.
Because he's
You got Philly, and I think with the Chiefs, they're 1.5 point favorite, which is I'm not a gambler, Mark, because I already do enough of that in my day job. Yeah. That 1.5, that is the perfect spread to incentivize people from both sides. I'm kind of a little bit sheepish to admit it, but I'm somewhat of a Swiftie, so I will go with Kansas City. And obviously, Tom Brady was my guy from Michigan. I think Mahomes has a real chance to become the GOAT, at least in the short term, because I think the greatest of all time is a very generational tagline if you kind of grew up seeing certain things. So we'll see. I think it's going to be a close game. Hopefully there are not any terrible calls, because I do not want referees determining sport outcome.
But that's what I'm in there. And I would like it to be a good game. Most Super Bowls are not good games. They're blowouts. So I'd like it to be a good game, and may the best team win.
May the best team win. And we'll wrap up on that and remind our listeners, as always, rate, review, subscribe, and as always, stay current. Thank you for joining us this week on Digital Currents. Check out our links to our website and social media in the show's description box. Please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
This podcast should not be construed as investment advice nor solicitation for the sale of any security, advisory, or other service. Investment themes and ideas discussed may be owned by funds managed by the host and podcast guests. Any conflicts at the time of production have been mentioned by the host but are subject to change. Listeners should consult their personal financial advisors before making any investment decisions.